The transport ship carrying Earth's delegation cut through the darkness of space toward Zenith Prime. The massive orbital station that served as the heart of Galactic Council operations for over 3,000 years. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the observation window, watching the station grow larger with each passing moment. Her reflection ghostly against the backdrop of stars and the gleaming metal structure ahead, nervous. Admiral Marcus Voss asked from behind her, his military uniform crisp and decorated with medals that represented humanity's brief but determined venture into the cosmos, turned to face him, with a slight smile crossing her lips, despite the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Terrified, actually. She admitted without shame or hesitation, but this is what we trained for. What humanity has been working toward since we discovered we weren't alone in the universe. The Admiral nodded with understanding clear in his weathered face. Lines earned, from decades of service and hard decisions that came with command, just remember, Voss said quietly so only she could hear, above the subtle hum of the ship's engines. We're representing 4 billion people who are counting on us to make this work. Sean straightened her formal diplomatic attire one last time before responding. With conviction in her voice, then we better not disappoint them. The docking procedure went smoothly with mechanical precision as their ship connected to one of Zenith Prime's many ports designed to accommodate vessels from hundreds of different species and technological backgrounds. As the airlock cycled open, Chen took a deep breath of the processed air that smelled faintly of something she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps ozone mixed with scents from a dozen alien worlds. The reception hall stretched out before them in a display of architectural grandeur that took Chen's breath away despite all the briefings and virtual simulations she had studied. Massive columns rose toward a ceiling so high it seemed to fade into artificial mist, or perhaps holographic clouds designed for atmospheric effect. Beings of every conceivable shape and size moved through the space with purpose. Some walking on 2 legs like humans, while others floated or skittered or moved in ways that defied easy description. A tall figure approached them with skin that shimmered between blue and green depending on the angle of light, wearing robes that seemed to flow like liquid mercury. Ambassador Chen and Admiral Voss of Earth. The being said through a translation device that rendered the alien language into perfect English with only a slight mechanical undertone. I am Coordinator Thesic, assigned to guide you to the council chamber for your formal introduction. Chen extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting she had been assured was considered acceptable, if unusual among council species. Regarded the hand with what might have been curiosity before carefully grasping it with 3 long fingers. That felt cool and smooth against her palm. Follow me, please, Thesic said, turning to lead them through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked. Walls displaying scenes from different worlds, or perhaps live feeds from across the galaxy. Journey took nearly 20 minutes, during which they passed countless aliens who stopped to stare at the humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to what Chen uncomfortably recognized as contempt. Finally, they reached a set of enormous doors that split down the middle and swung inward, with dramatic slowness revealing the council chamber beyond. The room was circular with tiered seating rising up on all sides like an ancient amphitheater. Each section occupied by delegations from different species that comprised the Galactic Council membership. At the center of the floor stood a raised platform where Chen and Voss were directed to stand, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. Under the gaze of thousands of alien eyes, a being that resembled a massive serpent with 6 arms and a head crowned with crystalline structures that might have been horns or sensory organs rose from the highest tier. I am Speaker Voreth, the being announced in a voice that resonated through the chamber without need for translation devices. Somehow comprehensible to all present through means Chen didn't understand. You stand before the Galactic Council as representatives of the species you call humanity and the world you call Earth. Chen stepped forward, preparing to deliver the speech she had rehearsed hundreds of times. Words carefully chosen to convey both respect and dignity, but before she could speak, Voreth continued with a tone that made her blood run cold. We have reviewed your petition for membership and your claims of technological achievement, the speaker said, as murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Your fusion drives are primitive by our standards, barely sufficient for system travel, let alone meaningful galactic commerce. Chen felt Voss tensed beside her, but kept her own expression neutral, even as shock and anger warred within her chest. Your presence in space spans barely 2 centuries. Another voice called out from the tiers, this one belonging to a being covered in metallic plates that reflected light like burnished copper. The youngest species currently on this council has explored the stars for over 5,000 years. Laughter echoed through the chamber. Not the polite amusement of diplomatic gatherings, but genuine mocking laughter that cut deeper than any weapon. Your military consists of projectile weapons and chemical explosives. Yet another delegate added with barely concealed disdain dripping. From every word technologies we abandoned before your ancestors learned to make fire? Speaker Vorith raised one massive arm calling for silence, which came gradually as the various species settled back into their seats. The Council recognizes that Earth has achieved rudimentary space capability, Vorath declared as if bestowing a great honor. Therefore, we are prepared to offer you probationary observer status, which will allow you to witness Council proceedings without vote or voice in decisions. Chen found her voice finally cutting through the humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. With respect, Speaker Vorath, she began choosing each word with care. We came here seeking partnership and mutual cooperation. We acknowledge that many Council species possess technologies beyond our current capability, but we also bring unique perspectives and solutions that could benefit all. The laughter that erupted this time was even louder than before, with some delegates actually standing to express their amusement at human presumption perspectives. Our voice shouted above the din. What perspectives could a species that still suffers from poverty and disease and war possibly offer civilizations that solved such problems millennia ago? Vorth waited for silence again before fixing Chen with eyes that glittered with something between pity and contempt. You? Our evolutionary infant's ambassador, Chen, the speaker said with finality that left no room for argument, accept the generous offer we have made, or depart in return. When your species has matured enough to stand among those who built civilizations while your world was still cooling from its formation, Chen looked at Admiral Voss, who gave the slightest nod. Their contingency plan already forming between them through years of working together. We appreciate the Council's consideration, Chen said with a voice that remained steady, despite the rage building inside her. Like a storm, Admiral Voss and I will need to consult with our government before accepting any terms, of course, Borath said with magnanimous condescension. We expect your answer within 1 standard cycle, Admiral. Voss stepped forward then, with military bearing that commanded attention even in this chamber of advanced beings. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but somehow carried to every corner of the vast space a word of advice. Speaker Vorith, Voss said, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching or showing any sign of the diplomatic deference Chen had displayed. In human history, the greatest mistakes were always made by those who confused technological advantage with actual superiority. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing with ice in his tone. And the worst defeats were always suffered by those who underestimated opponents they considered primitive. Silence fell over the chamber, this time heavy with tension rather. Then Mirth and Voroth laughed, a sound like grinding stones that triggered fresh laughter from the assembled council members. Is that a threat, little human? The speaker asked, with amusement clear in every syllable. A smiled then, cold expression that never reached his eyes. No, Speaker Vorith, he replied, turning to leave with Chen at his side. Just an observation from one of those evolutionary infants you find so amusing. The walk back through the corridors seemed longer than before, every alien they passed staring at them with renewed interest after their dramatic exit from the council chamber. Neither Chen nor Voss spoke until they were safely back aboard their ship, with the airlock sealed and the docking clamps. At least the Zenith Prime fell away behind them, Chen finally allowed herself to collapse into the command chair. They really have no idea what they just did, she said quietly, staring at the view screen. Admiral Voss stood beside her with arms crossed and expression grim but determined. No, they don't, he agreed with voice carrying absolute certainty, but they're going to learn very soon exactly what happens when you humiliate humanity. He turned to the communications officer stationed at her console. Send the encrypted message to Earth Command, Voss ordered. The emergency session of the United Earth Defense Command convened in a bunker 3 kilometers beneath the Rocky Mountains, where the most critical decisions affecting humanity's survival had been made for the past 70 years, General Catherine Lee Morrison stood at the head of the massive conference table, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time data from every corner of human-controlled space and beyond. Ambassador Chen and Admiral Voss had arrived just 4 hours earlier, after pushing their transport to maximum velocity, and the exhaustion showed on both their faces. "Show them," Morrison ordered, with voice that cut through the low murmur of conversation among the assembled military and intelligence leaders. Main display flickered to life, showing edited footage from the council chamber that had been transmitted in encrypted bursts throughout their journey home. The room fell silent as they watched Speaker Borath deliver his contemptuous assessment of humanity, followed by the mocking laughter of hundreds of alien delegates. When the recording ended, Morrison turned to face the group with expression carved from granite. "For 3 decades, we have maintained surveillance operations across council space." She began pacing along the length of the table. "We have intercepted communications, mapped military installations, analyzed technologies, and identified vulnerabilities in every major species. Defensive capabilities." She paused, letting that information settle before continuing with measured precision. "We did this not because we sought conflict, but because we understood a fundamental truth, that every civilization that survived long enough to reach the stars learned the hard way: hope for peace, but prepare for war." Admiral Voss finished standing from his chair to address his colleagues. "The Council thinks we're children playing with chemical rockets and primitive computers. They have no idea that we've been preparing for exactly this scenario. Since the first automated probe visited our solar system 40 years ago," a colonel from intelligence command raised her hand before speaking. "Sir, we intercepted that probe, reverse engineered its technology, and used it as a template to develop countermeasures. But we always assumed first contact would be diplomatic." "So did I," Chen admitted from her position near the display. "I spent 5 years learning council protocols and studying their history. I believed that reason and mutual benefit would be enough." She shook her head with bitter understanding now, replacing the optimism she had carried to Zenith Prime. "I was wrong. The Council doesn't respect reason from those they consider inferior. They respect only strength." Morrison pulled up a new display showing a complex web of interconnected mission parameters and target designations. Operation Checkmate was designed by our best strategic minds, working with quantum probability simulators that modeled millions of potential first contact scenarios. The plan accounts for every major council species, their military capabilities, political structures, and psychological profiles. She highlighted several nodes in the network that began to pulse with red indicators. "Phase 1 deploys our stealth fleet to strategic positions throughout. Ships use technology the Council doesn't even know is possible because they never pursued. Certain research paths we found essential. A young captain from the experimental weapons division stood to elaborate when Morrison gestured for him to proceed. "Ma'am. The Council species developed impressive energy shields and plasma-based weapons over thousands of years," he explained, pulling up technical schematics. "But they abandoned research into what they called inelegant kinetic systems. About 2,000 years ago, they considered such weapons primitive and beneath them." Admiral Voss smiled grimly at that assessment, which means their shields are optimized to deflect or absorb energy-based attacks. He said, understanding the implications immediately. "Exactly, sir," the captain confirmed with enthusiasm, breaking through military formality. "Our relativistic kinetic weapons will pass through their shields like they don't exist. Simple mass accelerated to extreme velocities using electromagnetic launch systems. No fancy particles. No exotic energy signatures, just tungsten rods traveling at significant fractions of light speed." Morrison brought up another display showing what appeared to be innocuous civilian infrastructure throughout. "Council Space Phase 2 activates our cyber warfare capabilities," she continued, with voice taking on almost academic tone. "For 15 years, we've inserted dormant code into Council communication networks through compromised trade vessels and diplomatic channels. This code has been replicating and spreading throughout their systems completely undetected." Chen felt a chill run down her spine, despite the controlled temperature of the command center. You mean we've had access to their communications all this time? She asked, already knowing the answer. Not just communications ambassador, replied a thin man wearing the insignia of the Signals Intelligence Corps. We have access to their financial networks, military command systems, civilian infrastructure controls, and personal devices belonging to every council delegate, including Speaker Voreth himself. He pulled up a document that made Chun's eyes widen in shock. This is the speaker's personal correspondence with his mate discussing strategies to maintain Voreth dominance over younger council species. This one shows the Krell military leadership debating whether to stage false flag attacks to justify expanding their territory, and this one, he said, highlighting another file with visible satisfaction, shows 3 separate council members taking bribes from corporations seeking favorable trade agreements. The implications crashed over Jin like a physical wave when you release this, she said, slowly understanding the magnitude of what they were about to do. You'll destroy their credibility, create chaos in their political systems, and prove that humanity has been watching them far longer than they suspected. Precisely, Morrison confirmed without trace of sympathy or hesitation. They humiliated us publicly. We respond by demonstrating that we know their secrets, their weaknesses, and their lies. Admiral Voss walked to the display, showing deployment positions for the human fleet. Phase 3 is the most critical. He said, tracing trajectories with his finger. Our stealth ships will position themselves in orbit of every council homeworld simultaneously, not to attack but to broadcast their presence. Each ship will transmit a simple message, identifying itself and providing technical specifications that prove our capabilities. A Rear Admiral from Fleet Command stood with concern evident on his weathered face. Sir, with respect, that will expose our stealth technology. He objected firmly. Once they know we can avoid their sensors, they'll develop countermeasures. Let them try. Voss replied with confidence born from detailed analysis. Our stealth systems use quantum entanglement principles that their physics models say are impossible to weaponize. By the time they figure out how we did it, we'll have moved on to technologies they haven't even imagined. Morrison pulled up a timeline showing the coordinated execution of all 3 phases at 0 hour. Our ships decloak simultaneously at every major council world, she explained, highlighting the cascade of events. 30 seconds later, the cyber attack begins, releasing classified documents across every public network in council space. 60 seconds after that, Admiral Voss delivers our message from a secure broadcast location. Chen studied the timeline with growing understanding of the psychological warfare being waged. You're not giving them time to think or organize a response, she observed with professional appreciation. You're overwhelming them with multiple crises at once. Exactly. Morrison confirmed, pulling up psychological profiles of key council leaders. The Voreth are proud and hierarchical. They'll be paralyzed by the exposure of their speaker's corruption. The Krell are logical and systematic. They'll immediately begin analyzing how we penetrated their systems. The Drazen are militaristic and aggressive. They'll want immediate retaliation but won't know where to strike. She closed the displays and faced the assembled command staff with absolute seriousness. This operation will fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy, Morrison stated, letting the weight of that reality settle over everyone present. But we cannot allow the Council to treat humanity as a joke or a curiosity. We are not children begging for acceptance. We are a sovereign species with the right to stand as equals among the stars. Admiral Voss added, his voice to the conviction filling the room. Every calculation shows that if we accept their probationary status, we'll be trapped in that position for centuries, he said grimly. Species that enter the Council as subordinates almost never achieve full membership. They become client states serving the interests of older, more established powers. Chen felt the full responsibility of their decision, pressing down on her shoulders. If we do this, there's no going back, she said quietly, looking around at faces she had come to know and trust. The Council will never forget or forgive this humiliation. We'll make permanent enemies. Morrison met her gaze with unflinching resolve. They made us enemies the moment Speaker Voreth laughed at us, she replied with simple truth. We're just choosing to be enemies they fear rather than enemies they mock. Fortress Vanguard hung in the void like a monument to Drazen military supremacy. a massive construct of alloys and energy fields that had defended the approaches to the Drazen homeworld for 8 centuries without ever falling to enemy assault supreme. Commander Thraz stood on the command deck surrounded by holographic displays, showing sensor data from 1,000 light-year radius. His forearms crossed in the traditional Drazen posture of absolute confidence status report. He demanded from his chief tactical officer, who operated the weapons control station with practiced efficiency. All defensive grids operating at optimal capacity, Commander. The officer replied, checking readouts that scrolled across multiple screens. Shield generators are at full power. Fleet elements report ready status across all quadrants. Long-range sensors show no anomalies or approaching threats. Thraz nodded. With satisfaction evident in his bearing, the fortress had been built during the greatest period of Drazen expansion, when their warrior culture had conquered 17 systems and established dominance over dozens of lesser species. Now it served as both defensive stronghold and symbol of Drazen military philosophy, absolute strength combined with eternal vigilance. Commander, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from multiple council worlds. The communications officer interrupted with confusion coloring her voice. Reports of unidentified vessels appearing in orbit simultaneously across council space. Thraz turned sharply, focusing his attention on the new information impossible. He declared with certainty born from decades of military experience, no fleet could coordinate jumps across such distances with that precision. The timing variations alone would his words cut off as alarms suddenly shrieked throughout the command deck, bathing everything in pulsing red warning lights. Contact. The tactical officer shouted, pressing controls frantically. Multiple vessels just appeared within the fortress defensive perimeter. Classification unknown, signature unknown. They just materialized, Commander. No jump signatures, no energy buildup, nothing. Thraz strode to the tactical display, watching as 6 ship icons appeared on the hologram surrounding. Fortress Vanguard in a perfect geometric pattern. Raise shields to maximum, he ordered calmly. Despite the impossible situation developing before him, all weapons hot, prepare to engage on my command. The fortress shuddered as its massive shield generators increased, output creating a cocoon of energy that could absorb the firepower of entire battle fleet's shields at maximum. Commander. Tactical confirmed, while targeting solutions appeared around each unknown vessel, all weapons locked and ready. Attempting to scan the unknowns, but our sensors are getting minimal return. It's like they're absorbing or deflecting active scans. Before, Thraz could respond, the communication systems activated without authorization, playing a message. Across every channel simultaneously, the voice that emerged spoke in perfect Drazen language but with an accent. Thraz didn't recognize Fortress Vanguard. This is Captain Maria Santos of the United Earthship Retribution, the voice said with professional military bearing. We are broadcasting our presence to demonstrate humanity's capability and resolve. We have no hostile intent at this time, but we are fully prepared to defend ourselves if engaged, Thraz felt, his combat instincts warring with confusion at the audacity of these unknown vessels. Earth, he said almost to himself before remembering the recent council session, the primitives with chemical rockets. Get me a weapons lock now, Commander. I'm trying, but their ships are generating some kind of interference. Tactical reported with frustration evident. Every time we achieve lock, they shift position by microseconds. It's like they're predicting our targeting algorithms. You're in a human voice continued with tone remaining calm and measured. We understand this is concerning Supreme Commander Thraz. Captain Santos said, using his name and title in a way that made his blood run cold. How does she know my name? Thraz demanded, spinning to face his intelligence officer. We are displaying detailed specifications of our vessels on your secondary communication channel. Santos continued as if she could hear his question. You will note that our ships use stealth technology based on quantum principles your species has not yet explored. You will also note that we have been monitoring Fortress Vanguard for approximately 6 standard years of holographic display activated, showing technical schematics of the human vessels, along with data that made Thraz's combat-hardened mind reel with implications. The ships were smaller than traditional Council warships, but their specifications showed technologies that shouldn't exist. This is impossible, his chief engineer muttered, scanning the data with growing alarm. These power-to-mass ratios, the energy efficiency of their drives. The sensor-absorbing hulls commander their generations ahead of us. In specific technologies, Thraz refused. To accept what his instruments were telling him, all vessels open fire. He commanded with voice carrying absolute authority. Destroy those ships immediately. The fortress's weapon systems unleashed devastating volleys of plasma fire that lit up the void with energies hot enough to vaporize asteroids' point defense. Turrets added their own contribution, creating a web of destruction that nothing could possibly survive. The tactical display showed the weapons converging on the human ships with perfect accuracy. Then the human vessels simply weren't there anymore. Where did they go? Thras shouted as his weapons struck empty space. Did they jump? Negative, Commander. Sensors reported with voice barely controlled. They moved. Conventional thrust, but accelerating at rates that should liquefy any organic crew. They're now positioned outside our weapons. Range, the human captain's voice returned, carrying a note of something Thraz recognized as disappointment. Fortress Vanguard, you have fired upon ships operating under diplomatic protocols, Santos stated with words chosen carefully. This constitutes an act of aggression against Earth. We are authorized to respond. Thraz felt ice forming in his gut as his tactical training finally overcame his pride. These weren't primitives stumbling around in the dark. These were warriors who had studied Drazen tactics and capabilities, then developed specific counters all ships' evasive maneuvers. He ordered rapidly emergency broadcast to Homeworld. We are under attack by unknown hostiles with advanced capabilities. Request immediate fleet support to late commander. Tactical said with voice gone hollow, I'm detecting incoming projectiles, 6 objects accelerating toward us at... She paused, checking her instruments again, as if unable to believe the reading at 0.3 light speed. 0.3. The chief engineer repeated with horror, replacing confusion. That's relativistic velocity. The kinetic energy alone would be shields up, Thraz commanded. Desperately redirect all power to forward deflectors. Emergency protocols now. The fortress's massive shield generators strained to maximum, output creating a barrier that had stopped countless attacks over. 8 centuries of service energy crackled across the invisible barrier as power flowed through systems designed by the greatest Drazen engineers. Then the first projectile hit the shield, flickered once as the simple tungsten rod traveling at nearly 1/3 the speed of light passed through the energy barrier like it didn't exist. The kinetic energy released by the impact exceeded anything Fortress Vanguard had been designed to withstand. Metal screamed as entire sections of the fortress crumpled inward from the force. The second projectile struck 3 seconds later, hitting a different section with the same devastating effect. Shield frequency has no effect on solid matter at relativistic speeds. The chief engineer shouted over alarms and the sound of explosions echoing through damaged sections. Our shields were never designed for kinetic weapons. We abandoned that research 2,000 years ago. The third and fourth projectiles hit, simultaneously creating a chain reaction of failures throughout the fortress's power distribution network. Life support failed in 17 sections. Weapon systems went offline across 60% of the station. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, making everyone on the command deck grab for support. Structural integrity at 32%. Damage control reported with panic breaking through military discipline. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Reactor 3's overloading evacuates sections 12 through 29. Thraz watched his fortress dying around him and understood with terrible clarity what had just happened. The humans had fought like humans, not like Drazen or Krell or any council species. They had used weapons the council considered obsolete and beneath them, and those primitive weapons had torn through defenses that had stood for centuries. Ceasefire. He commanded quietly, all weapons cold, signal our surrender. The communications officer looked at him with shock visible even through her professional composure. Commander, we've never surrendered, she said barely above a whisper. We're Drazen, we're dying. Thraz corrected with brutal honesty. What? And if we don't surrender now, there won't be anyone left to learn from this defeat. Signal the human ships. The human captain's voice returned after a moment that felt like an eternity. Fortress Vanguard, we acknowledge your ceasefire, Santos said with tone carrying no triumph or mockery. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos with delegates arriving in various states of panic, confusion, and outrage. as news of the human operation spread across Council's space like wildfire through a dry forest. Speaker Vorith called the chamber to order with difficulty as arguments broke out between different species. Delegations each trying to understand how the primitives they had mocked mere days earlier had suddenly become an existential threat. Order, Vorith commanded, using the full power of his amplified voice to cut through the cacophony. We will have order, or I will clear this chamber. The various delegates settled reluctantly into their seats, though the tension remained thick enough to feel physically present. In the air, high analyst Kresh of the Krell technocracy will present their findings on the human capabilities, Vorith announced, gesturing toward a tall crystalline being whose surface reflected light in complex patterns. Kresh moved to the central platform with movements that seemed to flow like liquid despite the being's solid appearance. Honorable Speaker and assembled council. Kresh began with voice-carrying undertones that suggested multiple harmonics. Beyond normal hearing range, the Krell have conducted comprehensive analysis of the human technological base following yesterday's unprecedented events. Our findings are deeply concerning. Holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing technical specifications and strategic assessments that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. First, regarding their stealth technology, Kresh continued highlighting several key data points. The humans have achieved practical quantum entanglement-based cloaking that renders their vessels effectively invisible to all known Council sensor systems. A Vorith delegate interrupted with voice sharp with accusation. Such technology violates the fundamental principles of quantum mechanics as understood by Council science. Kresh replied with patience that suggested long experience. Explaining complex concepts to those who didn't understand it violates quantum mechanics as interpreted by Council physics, which has followed a specific developmental path for 3,000 years. The humans apparently approached quantum theory from a different mathematical framework, leading to practical applications we never considered. The implications rippled through the chamber as delegates began to understand what that meant. You're saying they didn't break the laws of physics? A Krell science officer stated slowly. They discovered laws we didn't know existed precisely, Kresh confirmed before moving to the next display. Second, their kinetic weapons technology represents a deliberate choice to pursue what Council species abandoned as inefficient and primitive. However, at relativistic velocities, simple mass becomes one of the most devastating weapons possible. Our energy shields, which are optimized to deflect or absorb energy-based attacks, have no effect against solid matter traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The tactical implications crashed over the military delegates with force that made several stand and began shouting questions simultaneously. Levith called for order again, waiting until silence returned before allowing Kresh to continue. Third, and perhaps most alarming, is their cyber warfare capability, the analyst said, pulling up documents that made Vorith's eyes widen with recognition and horror. The humans have maintained complete surveillance of Council communications, financial networks, military systems, and personal devices for at least 15 standard years, possibly longer. The chamber erupted in denial and accusations, with delegates demanding to know how such penetration could have gone undetected by Council security forces. The answer is both simple and damning, Kresh explained, waiting for quiet. Council cybersecurity developed two counter-known threats from familiar adversaries. Using technologies we understand, the humans inserted code that operated on principles our security systems weren't designed to detect. Furthermore, they did so slowly over decades, building their access incrementally through compromised trade vessels and diplomatic channels. By the time their presence became undeniable, they had access to virtually everything. A senior intelligence officer from the Drazen delegation stood with forearms crossed in obvious frustration.
Wow.
You're describing an intelligence operation of staggering scope and patience, the officer said grudgingly. The planning alone would require decades. The discipline to maintain operational security across multiple generations. It suggests a level of strategic thinking that contradicts everything we believed about this species. Indeed, Kresh agreed before delivering the analysis that would reshape Council understanding, which brings us to the central question. How did humanity achieve such capabilities in approximately 40 standard years since first contact with Council. Technology. The analyst pulled up a timeline showing human technological development that made several delegates lean forward with sudden interest. Approximately 42 years ago, a Council automated survey probe entered human solar space conducting standard reconnaissance of the system. Kresh began tracing the probe's path. The probe transmitted data back to Council archives and was scheduled for retrieval. However, before retrieval could occur, the humans intercepted and captured the probe. Silence fell over the chamber as the implications became clear. They reverse-engineered our technology, Voreth said quietly, with something like respect entering his voice, despite himself worse than that speaker. Kresh corrected, pulling up detailed technical analysis they analyzed. Council technology identified its fundamental principles and limitations, then deliberately developed alternative approaches to achieve similar or superior capabilities. They didn't copy us. They learned from us, then surpassed us in specific domains. A younger delegate from a species that had achieved Council membership relatively recently spoke up with voice-carrying confusion. But how? The delegate asked, genuinely seeking understanding. How does a species with no faster-than-light capability and primitive computers achieve such advancement in mere decades? That is the question that should terrify us all. Kresh replied with tone suggesting the analyst understood implications beyond pure technical assessment, because the answer reveals something about humanity that we failed to recognize. They are what we would call a crisis adaptation species. They advance most rapidly when facing existential challenges. The Krell analyst pulled up historical data on human development, showing progression that defied normal patterns. Observe their technological advancement curves. Kresh explained, highlighting several dramatic jumps. Notice how their progress accelerates during periods of conflict or competition. Their world wars produced advancement in aviation, electronics, computing, and nuclear physics that would normally take centuries. Their space race, driven by political rivalry, achieved orbital capability in barely 60 years from first. Powered flight, they optimized for survival under pressure in ways that stable, long-lived species do not. Noril Thraz entered the chamber at that moment, his presence commanding immediate attention despite the circumstances. Formal uniform showed signs of hasty repair, and his bearing carried the weight of recent defeat. Honorable Council, Thraz said without waiting for formal recognition. I witnessed human capabilities firsthand at Fortress Vanguard. High Analyst Kresh's assessment is accurate but incomplete. Vorath gestured for the Drazen commander to continue. The humans didn't just develop superior technology, Thraz explained, moving to stand beside Kresh. They developed superior doctrine. Study their enemies obsessively. They identify weaknesses and create specific solutions. They fight without honor codes or sporting notions. They fight to win, using every advantage available. The Admiral pulled up tactical data from the engagement showing the precision and coordination of the human attack. 6 ships disabled Fortress Vanguard in 4 minutes. He stated, letting that fact speak for itself. It's a fortress that has stood for 800 years against every threat we faced. They knew exactly where to hit, exactly when to strike, and exactly how to overwhelm our defenses. This was not luck or accident. This was the result of years of intelligence gathering and tactical planning. Vorath, military commander, stood with voice carrying barely controlled anger. Then we mobilized the full strength of Council fleets. The commander declared with certainty, we crush Earth before they can spread this technology to other species. We make an example that will prevent future upstarts from challenging Council authority. No, Vorath said sharply, surprising everyone. Including the commander who had spoken. The speaker looked older somehow, as if the weight of their situation had aged him in mere days. Did none of you listen to what was just explained? Vorath asked with frustration evident. The humans have targeting solutions for 47 major military installations. They have access to our communications and command systems. They possess stealth capability that makes our sensor networks useless. The ceremonial hall at Zenith Prime had been transformed for the occasion, with banners representing every Council species hanging from the vaulted ceiling and holographic displays showing peaceful imagery from hundreds of member worlds. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the preparation chamber, checking her formal diplomatic attire one final time, while Admiral Marcus Voss reviewed security protocols on a portable display. Nervous? Voss asked, with slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Chen laughed quietly at the echo of their first conversation before the initial council meeting. Terrified. She admitted using the same word as before, but this time for different reasons. The door opened, admitting General Catherine Morrison wearing full-dress uniform, with enough medals and decorations to make clear her rank and authority. "The council is ready for you," Morrison said with tone carrying satisfaction mixed with caution. "Speaker Voreth himself will conduct the ceremony." "I imagine that must be difficult for him," Chen observed, moving toward the door, admitting he was wrong about us. "He's a politician." "Which means he's good at making necessary compromises," Morrison replied with pragmatic assessment. "But yes, I suspect his pride is rather bruised." "Good," Voss said. "Without sympathy, maybe next time he'll think twice before mocking species he doesn't understand." They walked through corridors that had seemed imposing and alien just days earlier, but now felt familiar as various council species moved aside to let the human delegation pass. The difference in their reactions was immediately apparent where, before, there had been contempt or dismissive curiosity. Now there was respect mixed with wariness, and in some cases barely concealed fear. "They're afraid of us," Chen said quietly, observing the reactions. "Let them be." Morrison replied with tone suggesting this was exactly the intended result. Fear breeds respect when coupled with restrained use of force. We demonstrated capability without unnecessary cruelty. That combination makes us unpredictable, which is the most dangerous thing any opponent can face. The main council chamber doors opened to reveal an assembly far different from the mocking crowd that had greeted them. Before every delegate stood as the human party entered, showing the formal respect due to equals, rather than the condescending tolerance shown to inferior speaker. Voroth waited at the center platform, his crystalline crown catching light and throwing rainbow patterns. Across the floor, Ambassador Chin, Admiral Voss, General Morrison, Voreth said with voice carrying throughout the chamber, "Welcome to the Galactic Council as full members with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities that status entails." Chen walked forward alone, as protocol dictated, with head held high and bearing reflecting 4 billion people who trusted her to represent their interests. "Speaker Voreth and honored council members," she began with voice steady. "Despite the magnitude of the moment, Earth accepts this membership with gratitude and with commitment to contribute meaningfully to the collective prosperity and security of all." Council species Voreth produced a crystal device that glowed with soft blue light. "This quantum key provides access to all council networks, databases, and secure communications," he explained, offering it to Chen. "It represents trust between our peoples and the mutual obligations we share." Chen accepted the device with both hands, showing the respect the gesture deserved. "Earth understands the responsibility this represents," she said, meeting Voreth's eyes directly. "We will honor the trust you place in us." The speaker nodded before speaking again with words clearly prepared in advance. "The Council acknowledges that our initial reception of Earth's delegation was—" He paused, choosing his next word with visible care, "inappropriate. We allowed assumptions about your species to cloud our judgment, and we responded to your legitimate requests with disrespect." The admission rippled through the chamber as delegates observed their speaker publicly accepting responsibility for the crisis. Furthermore, Voroth continued with tone taking on more formal quality, "The Council recognizes that Earth's response, while forceful, was proportionate to the provocation and demonstrated restraint that preserved lives and infrastructure when destruction would have been easier. This combination of capability and wisdom is the mark of a mature civilization worthy of Council membership." Chen felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to ease slightly. This was more than simple political necessity. Speaking this was genuine respect earned through demonstration of both strength and character, however. Voreth said, and Chen tensed again at the word. "Membership comes with expectations and obligations. Earth now has voice in council decisions, but also bears responsibility for collective security. How does your government respond to this responsibility, Admiral?" Voss stepped forward with military bearing that commanded attention. "Earth offers the following contributions to Council security. He stated clearly, first, we will share our stealth technology and relativistic weapon systems with Council defensive forces under controlled conditions. Second, we propose establishment of joint training programs between human and Council military forces to exchange tactical doctrine and strategic thinking. Third, we offer our intelligence gathering capabilities to help identify threats to Council space that current systems might miss. Murmurs spread through the assembled delegates at the unexpectedly generous terms several species had expected. Earth to hoard their technological advantages jealously. Additionally, General Morrison added, stepping forward to join her colleagues. Earth proposes new council bylaws regarding treatment of emerging spacefaring species. She produced a document that materialized as holographic text visible throughout the chamber. These proposed regulations would establish mandatory first contact protocols requiring respectful diplomatic engagement. Morrison explained, highlighting key sections. They would prohibit mockery or humiliation of species seeking council membership. They would create protections for developing civilizations against exploitation by more advanced species, and they would establish clear pathways for membership based on demonstrated capability rather than arbitrary age requirements. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications. These weren't just rules to prevent future incidents like Earth's humiliation, these were fundamental reforms to how the Council interacted with younger species. You seek to change Council culture, a Krell delegate observed with tone, suggesting careful analysis, not just gain membership. Yes, Chen confirmed, turning to address the assembly directly. Because Earth's experience revealed a systemic problem, the Council has become complacent, believing that age equals wisdom and that established ways are the only valid approaches. She gestured toward the various species represented in the chamber. How many potential member species have been turned away or discouraged because they didn't fit Council expectations? Chen asked, allowing the question to hang in the air. How much innovation and fresh perspective has been lost because you assumed only the old ways had value? Vorath considered her words with visible thoughtfulness before responding. Your point is well taken, Ambassador. He acknowledged, with tone carrying no defensiveness, the Council was founded on principles of cooperation and mutual advancement. Perhaps over 3 millennia we have drifted from those ideals. Admiral Thraz stood in his section, drawing attention from his fellow Drazen delegate. Speaker Vorath, I support Earth's proposed reforms. The military commander stated with voice carrying weight of recent experience. The humans taught me that warfare evolves, and species that cling to tradition above adaptation will inevitably fall behind. The same principle applies to diplomacy. In governance, we should welcome new perspectives, not mock them. Other delegates began rising to voice support or raise concerns, creating a genuine debate rather than the predetermined ceremony many had expected. Chen watched the discussion unfold with satisfaction mixed with cautious optimism. This was real engagement, treating Earth's proposals with seriousness they deserved. Hours passed as the Council worked through the implications of Earth's membership and proposed reforms. Compromises where negotiated language was refined and voting procedures were established. Finally, as the station's day cycle began transitioning toward artificial night, Vorath called for final votes on both Earth's full membership and the reformed first contact protocols. Both passed with substantial majorities. Then it is done. Vorath declared with finality, Earth is recognized as full Council member with all attendant rights and responsibilities, and the Council commits to reformed protocols that will govern our interactions with emerging spacefaring civilizations. The chamber erupted in formal applause that varied wildly between species based on their physical capabilities. Clapped, others produced harmonic tones, and several created bioluminescent displays. Chen allowed herself a genuine smile of relief and accomplishment.